At 12:38 a.m. on August 9, 2013, a man placed a frantic call to emergency services. His voice was shaky, his words were slurred, rushed, and difficult to understand. He claimed someone was chasing him. He claimed he was bleeding and he was hiding in a field, afraid for his life. Less than 15 minutes later, the call ended. That man was Brandon Lawson. He vanished that night without a trace. And more than a decade later, his disappearance remains one of the most disturbing and heavily debated cases in modern true crime. Brandon Lawson was 26 years old at the time of his disappearance. He lived in San Angelo, Texas, where he worked various jobs and helped support his family. Brandon was a father of 4 children, and those close to him consistently described him as someone who loved being a dad. Despite struggles in his life, Brandon was known to be protective, loyal, and deeply connected to the people he cared about. However, his life was far from easy. Brandon had battled substance abuse for years. He had periods of sobriety followed by relapses. By the summer of 2013, he had recently relapsed after a long period of being clean. This detail is often emphasized when people discuss the case, but it's important to understand something clearly. Those closest to Brandon, including his family, have repeatedly stated that while he struggled, he was not suicidal. He had future plans, he had responsibilities, and he had every intention of continuing his life. Which makes what happened next all the more unsettling. On the night of August 8, 2013, Brandon was driving with his girlfriend. Sometime after midnight, the two got into an argument. The exact nature of that argument has never been fully disclosed, but witnesses say it wasn't unusual for Brandon to cool off by walking away after disagreements. Shortly after the argument, Brandon pulled his truck over on the side of U.S. Highway 277 near Brant, Texas. He got out of the vehicle and he walked away into the darkness. At first, nothing about this seemed alarming, but within minutes, the situation escalated rapidly. Not long after leaving his truck, Brandon called his younger brother, Kyle Lawson. Kyle later described Brandon's voice as panicked and frantic. Brandon told him that he was bleeding. He claimed someone was chasing him. He sounded confused, terrified, and out of breath. Kyle struggled to understand exactly what Brandon was saying, but he knew something was very wrong. Without hesitation, Kyle got into his car and began driving toward Brandon's last known location. As the call continued, Brandon described hiding in tall grass near the road. He claimed he could hear people nearby. At one point, Brandon abruptly shouted something that would later become one of the most controversial moments in the case. Words that people still argue about to this day. Words that may completely change the interpretation of what happened that night. At 12:38 a.m., Brandon placed a call to 911. The call would last nearly 13 minutes. During that time, Brandon spoke in broken sentences. Some of his words were difficult to understand, either because of poor signal quality, stress, or his mental state at the time. He told the dispatcher that he was in a field. He mentioned bleeding. He claimed someone was chasing him. At one point, Brandon appeared to say that there was a vehicle nearby. Then he said he was hiding. As the call went on, Brandon became quieter. His responses slowed. Eventually, he stopped responding entirely. The dispatcher continued asking questions. There was no answer, and then the line disconnected. This was the last confirmed communication Brandon Lawson ever made. Kyle Lawson arrived at the location described by Brandon within minutes. Law enforcement arrived shortly after. Brandon's truck was still parked along the highway. Inside were his personal belongings, including his phone charger and wallet. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. No blood was found. No damaged clothing. No footprints that could clearly indicate where Brandon had gone. It was as if he had simply disappeared into the night. Authorities began searching the surrounding area almost immediately. Officers combed the roadside with flashlights. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters later scanned the area from above, but despite extensive efforts, nothing was found. Dogs reportedly lost Brandon's scent quickly. Search teams found no evidence that he had been injured, attacked, or struck by a vehicle. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Still no sign of Brandon Lawson. When the 911 call was eventually released to the public, it sparked widespread debate. Online communities began dissecting every second of the recording. People slowed it down, they isolated phrases, they enhanced the audio. One phrase in particular became the center of intense disagreement. Did Brandon say, "I'm bleeding," or did he say, "They're bleeding"? That single word changes the entire narrative. If Brandon said, "I'm bleeding," it suggests he was injured and possibly disoriented. If he said, "They're bleeding," it implies the presence of others and possibly violence. To this day, there is no official consensus. One of the most commonly cited explanations is that Brandon was experiencing paranoia or hallucinations related to substance use. Supporters of this theory point to his recent relapse and erratic behavior during the calls. However, critics argue that Brandon demonstrated several moments of clarity. He gave accurate descriptions of his location. He made multiple phone calls, he actively sought help. These details make it difficult to dismiss everything as mere hallucination. Another theory suggests Brandon may have accidentally injured himself, fallen into a ditch, or succumbed to environmental exposure. West Texas terrain can be dangerous at night, especially in unfamiliar areas. But extensive searches of the surrounding land found no remains. No clothing, no trace. Which raises the question, how could a body simply vanish? Perhaps the most disturbing theory is that Brandon encountered someone else that night. Someone who may have posed a real threat. Supporters of this theory believe Brandon's fear sounded genuine. They argue that his descriptions during the calls were too specific to be imagined. However, there is no concrete evidence to confirm the involvement of another person. No witnesses, no suspects, no forensic proof. Years have passed since Brandon Lawson disappeared. Despite continued attention from online communities, no major breakthroughs have occurred. His family continues to advocate for answers. They continue to believe that someone somewhere knows what happened that night, and that the truth has yet to come out. And Brandon Lawson remains missing. If you have a theory about what happened to Brandon Lawson, share it below. Sometimes the smallest detail can lead to the biggest answers. And sometimes, the truth is still out there waiting to be found.